Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. I'm so glad you're here. Last week, I made 2 Christmas tree ornaments that were How to Train Your Dragon themed. And you could adapt those ornaments to a theme of your own. And it is the same with this week's ornaments. I'm making 2 more How to Train Your Dragon ornaments, but you could definitely adapt these to your own theme. I'm going to start by making a little stack of How to Train Your Dragon books. And this craft was first created by my child who loves How to Train Your Dragon. So what I did was recreate their craft. And to start, what you're going to do is make book covers of the books that you want to use. So I'm using the first 4 How to Train Your Dragon books. And I had my child take photographs of their books so that I could use their original books. You want the front cover, the back cover, and the spine if possible. It's probably better to scan them in. I had to do some adjusting with these to get them to look right. Now, when my child did this originally, they did it in like MS Paint. I'm using Photoshop. I had to clean up the backgrounds and scale the books, and I just scaled them so that they're all the same size, but they don't have to be precise. If you don't have the books that you want to use, you can go on bookseller websites and get pictures of the covers and usually the back covers. The only part that might be a little tricky is the spines. And what you could do with the spines is just take the color from the book. So, for example, with the red cover, you can see there's a sort of greenish, brownish color on either side of the spine. You could take that color and just decide what size you want the spine to be and fill it in. And then I would put the title there because you are going to see the spines of these books in the craft. You're also going to want 2 pages from the inside of whatever book you're going to put on top of the stack. And I got those from Amazon just with the look inside feature in Amazon. I just took screenshots. And again, you want those to be the same size. So once you have all your little book covers and they're the size that you like, you're going to print them out on a color printer. So once I had all of those, I just cut them out really precisely because you don't want any of the white paper. So you want to make sure you're seeing just book cover because you don't want to destroy the illusion. And once they're cut out, you want to give them a stiff back. So you could use a piece of white cardstock or off-white cardstock. What I'm using here is an old tissue box. I like to reuse this sort of cardboard, so like a cereal box or something would work. And I'm using Mod Podge to adhere my book covers to the pieces of tissue box. And I'm adhering to the colored side. And I'm leaving space around that. I'm going to then trim them. So I just trimmed them, making sure that you couldn't see any of the tissue box this time. And after I trimmed them, I used a ruler to get a straight line and to bend them where the spine is. So bend the front cover and bend the back cover. And that's just because I want it to dry in the bent position. So I don't want it to tear when I bend it. And because I used cardboard, my next step was to Mod Podge them down to white paper so that the inside will be white paper. And once I had done that, I then cut them out roughly and bent them again and then left them to dry. Now, to make the pages of the book, you're going to want to measure your book covers. You can see mine are around 2.5 inches tall and around 1.5 inches wide. So what we're going to do is cut pages for the book. And I used mostly scrap paper for this. I have a lot of white printed scrap paper. Because it's a book, I didn't think that printing on one side would be a problem, but I did want to make sure that any visible pages would be white on the sides so that you can't see the printing because the scale would be off. So I cut strips, but I cut strips in 2 different widths because the How to Train Your Dragon books have different width pages, so it's not one smooth edge. So I cut strips in a couple of different widths and then the height of the books. And I just sat in front of the TV and cut a bunch of these little pages until I felt like my books were full enough. And in fact, I cut probably a little bit more than I ended up needing. And then I mixed up a sort of a tan paint, very light tan, and mixed that into some Mod Podge. So I'm going to Mod Podge these pages into the book, but I don't want them to be such a stark white. I think maybe a slightly more yellowish color would have been better than what I have here. I did try to add some orange to make it a little more yellow, but this is what I had. So what I did was try to get my pages nice and tidy in the book. Now the edge that is facing out isn't going to be flat, but the top and bottom should be flat. And then I put Mod Podge on each of the covers, and I made sure to cover that completely because it is slightly tinted, and put my pages in, and then I Mod Podged all around the pages and tried to get a little bit between the pages, so I fanned it a little bit as I was Mod Podging. And then I clamped it shut. And you just want to be careful here that you're not making a mark on the cover of the book, so you could also just put something very heavy on top of the book because we do want it to dry nice and flat. For the book that's going to be open, you're going to split your stack of pages in half and take the pages that you printed out from the inside of the book and put one on the top of each stack, and they're going to be facing each other. And then you're going to glue each stack one to each end of the book, and then glue around the edges, and then glue over the top of those pages. So you'll have 3 flat books, and then you'll have one that's open that has pages that are from the book that are visible. And let all of that dry. Now you're going to want to stack your books in a way that looks pleasing to you. I did not stack mine in order because I don't love the cover of the second book as much as I love some of the other covers. So I just stacked them, and you want to offset them a little bit so you can see some of those beautiful covers. And then I used wood glue to glue them together. So I just put a little bit of wood glue down on the top of the bottom book where the other book was going to overlap. Put that book on top, did the same for the next book, and then I did the same for the book that's open on top, and you can see how that's positioned sort of like a little tent on top, and used wood glue to glue that down. And then to clamp it, I just tied a piece of twine around the stack of books. Now, once that is completely dry, I Mod Podged over the entire stack. And I did put a tiny bit of my tint into the Mod Podge, so there is a little bit of tint over the covers of these books as well. Now, to give it a hanger, I have these tiny eye hooks. Says number 214. I don't know if that's helpful, but they're just really small. And I'm going to drill a hole in the middle of the book on the top, and then I just screwed the eye hook in by hand. I did put a little bit of wood glue on the eye hook before I screwed it in, and then cleaned up around it on the top of the book. Because the eye hook is a silver color, and I didn't think that went with my books very well, I used this chocolate brown metallic paint and put a couple of coats of paint over the eye hook. And then, because that would definitely come off if you left it like that, then I Mod Podged over that to seal it. And that's it for the little book ornament. I think that you could make a little stack of books like this for any book lover as a gift with their favorite books, and they don't have to go together. They could just be 4 books with beautiful covers that you know somebody loves. Now the next craft is sheep. What's more Christmassy than a sheep on the Christmas tree? And sheep are a big part of How to Train Your Dragon. They're comical, and I just love them. When I watched the most recent Christmas special, there were some sheep that were decorated for Christmas. So I thought I would try to recreate one of those. The sheep have sort of rectangular bodies, so I'm going to make a body for this sheep in a very easy way. I have this foam that something was packed in, and I'm going to cut a rectangle out of this foam. I think another good choice might be florist's foam for this, which you could pick up at the Dollar Tree or someplace else, any craft store. So I'm going to start by just cutting a sheep-shaped rectangle out of this foam. Mine is about 3.5 inches by 2 inches by 1.5 inches. So 3.5 inches long by about 2.5 inches wide by about 1.5 inches deep. And after I cut that, I did round off the edges just a little bit, but really not a lot, because if you look at these sheep, they really are pretty much rectangular. And I'm going to cover this with the fleece that I've used in so many different projects. I picked it up at Joann's, but I just wanted to show you that I had picked up this fat quarter at the Dollar Tree, which is a nice nubbly fabric that you could also use for a sheep. And you don't need very much fabric at all for this, so you could get away with probably a scrap if you have one. Now I'm going to wrap my sheep like a present using hot glue. So I cut a rectangle of the fabric, and I'm going to glue at the bottom. So just a bead of glue and then stick the fabric to the bottom. And then trim it so that it will match up, and another bead of glue, and then glue it to the bottom again. And then I'm going to wrap the ends sort of like a present, but I'm going to try to disguise the fact that I am wrapping it like a present. So I'm going to trim away some of the extra fabric and then just do my best to fold it over in such a way that you can't really tell that it's been wrapped up like a present. And the great thing about this sort of nubbly fleece is it's very forgiving with seams. And I'm just going to set that aside for the moment while I try to sculpt the face of the sheep. And as a model here, I have one of the sheep from the Christmas special, the one that has bells tied around it. There's one with bells and one with a ribbon. I'm going to try to make the bells version. What I have here is some homemade model magic. It's actually the same homemade model magic that I made the acorns with back in the fall. And I just kept it wrapped in plastic, and it's still good, and I have plenty of it to make a sheep's head. So I will include a link to a 2-minute technique here if you want to know how to make homemade model magic if you haven't done it before. It's just baking soda, cornstarch, and water cooked over low heat. So it's very easy to make, but you can also use, of course, commercial air dry clay like Model Magic. And I'm looking for some beads for the eyes of the sheep. The two that I started with were really too small, and we're going to paint these. I started with white ones. The ones that I found that were a better size are more of a pink pearl color, but that's fine. So basically I stuck those in where the eyes are going to be. I tried to mimic the shape of the sheep's face. I gave it the eyelids that the sheep has and the sort of the lip that the sheep has, and I pressed with the end of a paintbrush to give it some nose sort of holes. And I think, unfortunately, I may have lost a little bit of footage here, but what I did is pretty straightforward. I took some thin dowels and I cut 4 lengths for the legs, and I put some little hooves at the bottom of those with the Model Magic. These are actually a little big, I think, for the sheep. The How to Train Your Dragon sheep have comically small feet. And really, unfortunately, I seem to be missing a little bit of other footage where I put the little horns in. But this is just a brown pipe cleaner, and I just curled it around and stuck it in to the sheep's head. When I did that, and when I did the dowels that I put in the feet, I did put a little bit of wood glue around them to help them to stick. And this part I definitely did off camera. I realized that the sheep's head is so heavy that to connect it to the sheep, I was going to need a long dowel. So I put a long dowel into the sheep's head and then pulled it out, put wood glue on it, and stuck it back in. When I put the pipe cleaners in, I trimmed most of the fur off of the pipe cleaners. And now, I don't know why this never occurred to me before. This is the first time I've ever done this with Model Magic, and it worked great. So Model Magic, when it dries, whether it's the kind you buy or it's homemade, it often will shrink and crack. And in the past, what I've done is I've added more of the air dry clay to it until all the cracks are filled in. But what I decided to do here was to add spackle. And you can run water over spackle to make it smooth. So what I did was I filled in all of the cracks anywhere that I thought didn't look smooth enough on the sheep's head and on the feet with just some spackle. And then I ran over with a little bit of water to smooth it out. And once that had dried, I put a coat of Mod Podge over the entire sheep's head and the sheep's feet, not including the eyes. And this is just because I really wanted to get all of that sealed in and sealed together before I paint it. Now, I was very intimidated to paint this sheep's face, and I definitely did not capture that sort of affronted look on its face. Mine is more goofy. But I feel like it does look like How to Train Your Dragon sheep. And if I can do it, you can do it. So the colors that I used here are the pewter gray, and then I mixed up 3 shades of purple with blue, red, white, and black. So a lighter shade, a medium shade, and a darker shade. The snout is the medium shade, and then moving up towards the eyes is the lighter shade. So I just tried to mix those together as I painted it to get a sort of ombre transition from the medium shade to the lighter shade. And then that medium shade is over his eyes, like on the eyelids, and rimming the bottom of the eyes. And then I also gave him sort of eye bags with that medium shade. And then the darker shade I just used to highlight the lip and the inside of the nose. Now the eyes I painted white, and I just used black for the little black parts of the eye. And I have a sort of a salmon color, which is what I used for his tongue, which you can see out in the picture. And the first time I painted the eyes, I wasn't happy with them, so I just let them dry, painted over them with white, and tried again. It's just paint. I also painted his feet and legs the medium color, and then I painted the hooves the darker color. And once that paint had dried, I just covered everything with Mod Podge again. And this time, I got the little horns in a position that I wanted, and then I Mod Podged over them because I wanted them to look more like the hard horns that are in the pictures and not as if they were fuzzy. And I think that worked really well. Trimming the pipe cleaner and then Mod Podging it, I think gave them a pretty close look to what you see in the images. I did not want to try to mold them with Model Magic because I think they most certainly would break if I had done that. Now, before I put him together, I need to give him his wrapping, his leather sort of ribbon and the bells. So for the ribbon, I have this leather fabric scrap, and I just cut 1/4-inch strips that would go around him in each direction. For the bells, I had to get a little bit creative. Maybe you have cowbells like this, or maybe you don't think it really matters. You could certainly put jingle bells on. I thought about putting jingle bells on, but I thought I would try to recreate the cowbells. So what I have here is a straw, and I think an even bigger straw than this one would have been better, like maybe a boba straw. But this was a straw I had in my cupboard. I think it's from Dunkin'. So this is the straw that I used. And I cut it into 1/2-inch lengths. And what I'm going to do for the bells is I have these tiny gold beads, and I have some gold florist wire that I got at the Dollar Tree. So I'm going to put the gold florist wire through the bead and then twist it so that the bead is hanging off the end of a twisted piece of wire. And then I'm going to form that into a loop and twist it again. And I'm making the length of that such that the loop will poke out of the top of the piece of straw, and the bead, which is my clapper, will be just visible at the bottom of the straw, more or less. And then for the straws, you can't really glue them unless you use a special plastic glue, and mine dried up. So what I'm going to do is use a pin to poke 2 holes, one on each side of the top of the straw piece. So I'm going to sort of flatten it at the top and poke 2 holes, and then take a piece of the gold florist wire and poke it through each side and pull it tight, put the clapper through, and then twist it. And then to hold the clapper in place, I'm going to put a little hot glue inside. Now, I made 9 of those. I ended up using 6. I had thought I might use 8, and I wanted to have at least 1 extra. But for the size of my sheep and the size of my bells, I ended up using 6. Now I'm going to paint them, and I'm going to paint them with bronze metal paint and also the chocolate brown paint. And I started with bronze metal and then added the chocolate brown, but I think I would do it the other way. Paint them primarily with the chocolate brown. That was a color that I felt was closer to what I wanted, and then just give them a few highlights with the bronze metal. And you can see I have them sort of strung up on a piece of wire here, but I ended up taking them all off and touching them up with the bronze metal and the chocolate brown after they were mostly covered, because I really wanted to make sure you couldn't see any of that straw. And then after they were completely dry, I gave them a coat of Mod Podge, because this paint will scrape off of the plastic very easily. But if you cover them with the Mod Podge, it will stay sealed very nicely. So once they had dried, I positioned them on the piece of faux leather that's going around the sheep top to bottom. And I just sewed them on with some brown thread, sort of the way you would sew a button on. So I just sewed that through that loop. That's the clapper loop. And again, I did 6 of them. I did 3 facing down one direction and 3 facing down the other direction. And then I actually sewed the 2 pieces of leather together at the bottom as well. The other piece of leather you can see in the image goes over that one. And I just put that one over and just hot glued it in the front. Now to attach the feet and the head to the sheep's body, what I did was I cut holes through the fabric where I wanted those to go. And then I took some small scissors and poked them in and tried to ream a path for the dowels. And then I put my hot glue gun in and pumped a couple of pumps of hot glue in there and then stuck the feet in. For the head, I did not need to use any hot glue, I think because the dowel is so long. So once I cut the hole and pushed the head dowel through, it was on really firmly. So I just left it like that. Now he needs some ears, and I just went into my scrap fabric and found this gray felt, which I felt is very close to the color of the sheep and the color of the ears. Although I feel like maybe a more solid color of felt would have looked more like the sheep in my image here, but this is what I have. I didn't have a solid gray. So I just cut out ear shapes that looked like the image that I'm modeling here, and I just used a little dab of hot glue behind each horn to attach the ears. I was concerned about how to hang him. Most of the weight of this is the front. That head is very heavy, the back is very light. So what I decided to use was my gold florist wire. And what I did was I just wrapped it around the neck. So there's as you know, there's a dowel there. So I just brought it up from under his chin, wrapped it around his neck, and then twisted it, and then tucked it back. Well, twisted it to itself, so I had a loop, and then just tucked it back under his head. And that's pretty good for balance for this. That's really where the center of gravity is on this thing. So that's really where the hanger needed to be. And it matches the piece, I feel, well enough. So I was happy with that. The final step is to give him a tail. And I was a little bit challenged to figure out what the tails are supposed to look like. But I'm going to go with a tail from, I think, what might be the second movie, which is just a little furry tail. So I just used another little scrap of the fleece fabric. It's a very small tail. So I cut that and hot glued it to the behind over the piece of leather. And I gave it just a little bit of a pointy shape at the bottom and then just hot glued that on. And that's it for the sheep. So here are my new How to Train Your Dragon ornaments, and here they are with the other ornaments. I would love to know what you think. Do you have a favorite? Are there ornaments that you would like to make that I'm not making here? Please tell me in the comments. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you enjoy this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Happy Snoggletog. Take care.